The Bridge of Sensory Boundaries. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harrington adjusted the strap of his tactical vest as he made his way through the gleaming corridors of the Celestial Harmony Research Station, floating silently in orbit around Proxima Centauri b. The station was a marvel of collaborative human and Lumari ingenuity, an advanced hub for interspecies cooperation, scientific discovery, and diplomatic exchanges. It was designed to be the meeting point between two cultures so vastly different, yet united in their thirst for knowledge and progress. Daniel had long been a part of the Earth Defense Fleet, but this mission was far from the battlefield. It was a diplomatic science mission, one that would involve a groundbreaking experiment aimed at bridging the vast sensory gap between humanity and the Lumari. For the first time, a Lumari would experience human sensations, including something as simple and yet complex as the feeling of ticklishness. It was an experiment that had the potential to change the way the Lumari viewed the universe and their relationship with humans. As he entered the main laboratory of the Celestial Harmony, the soft hum of machinery and the quiet beeping of monitors greeted him. The laboratory was a state-of-the-art facility, its walls lined with holographic screens that displayed various scientific data and neurological scans. In the center of the room stood a polished examination table, where the Lumari subject, Dr. Thalia Neva, was preparing for the experiment. Thalia, the lead scientist of the Lumari contingent aboard the station, had been instrumental in formulating the study that would allow a Lumari to experience the world through human sensory input. Her lavender skin shimmered under the stereo lights, and her long, silvery hair was pulled back into a complex braid, typical of her species. Her large violet eyes reflected a quiet intensity as she reviewed the data on the screens, her mind already deep in thought. Daniel couldn't help but admire her calm demeanor. The Lumari were known for their analytical approach to life. They processed information in a deeply logical manner, and emotions were often seen as distractions rather than valuable components of experience. Sensations such as pain, pleasure, and even something as fundamental as ticklishness were lost to them. They perceived the world through a filter of reason, devoid of the raw, visceral reactions that humans had learned to embrace and navigate. The thought of helping Thalia experience the world in a completely new way was both exciting and humbling. Commander Harrington. Thalia's voice broke through his thoughts. It was soft and measured, as usual, but there was a hint of something else in her tone, a flicker of curiosity. I trust you are prepared for today's experiment. Daniel smiled, setting the neural connector down on the examination table with care. It was a sleek device, compact yet powerful, designed to link the Lumari brain to the sensory network of a human subject. Prepared as ever, Doctor. Are you sure you want to go through with this? It's a monumental leap. Thalia nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betraying a slight gleam of excitement. It is logical to proceed. Our species has always sought to understand the emotional and sensory dimensions of the universe, dimensions that humans experience so vividly. I believe that experiencing these sensations firsthand will expand our understanding, both of human nature and the universe as a whole. As the lead scientist of the Lumari delegation, Thalia had the final say in the experiment, and her calm confidence was unwavering. She had spent years studying human behavior, emotions, and sensory responses, but reading about them in data reports and experiencing them directly were two entirely different things. That's where the neural connector came in. The device was designed to sync the Lumari brain with human sensory inputs, allowing Thalia to experience what a human would feel in response to physical stimuli. This was a complex and delicate process, as the Lumari nervous system functioned in an entirely different manner from that of humans, where humans had evolved to process emotions and sensations as a mix of biology and emotion. The Lumari system filtered those sensations through pure logic. It was as if the Lumari were in a constant state of emotional detachment. The goal of the experiment was to let Thalia experience human reactions, something that had never been done before. Daniel moved behind Thalia, carefully setting up the neural nodes that would attach to her skin. His fingers brushed her lavender skin briefly, and he felt a brief moment of hesitation. It was unusual to be this close to a Lumari, let alone be the one administering such a deeply personal experience. But he had volunteered for this mission precisely because he believed in the potential for mutual understanding, for finding common ground between the two species. "Are you comfortable?" Daniel asked, his voice steady. Philia took a deep breath, her posture still perfect, a reflection of the disciplined nature of her species. "Yes, proceed, Commander." With a soft click, Daniel activated the device. The neural connector came to life, sending gentle pulses of energy to the nodes that were attached to Philia's temporal lobe and cerebellum. The readings on the nearby monitor flickered as the device began to sync with her nervous system, mapping the sensory pathways. The entire process was being monitored closely by both human and Lumari scientists, each of whom hoped that the experiment would yield not only valuable data but also a new understanding of cross-species interactions. As the synchronization continued, Philia's violet eyes widened slightly, a subtle indication that the device was beginning to work. The pulses of energy that flowed through her nervous system were triggering new responses. "I feel different," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with surprise. "That's normal," Daniel assured her, keeping a close eye on the readings. "Your brain is adjusting to the sensory parameters. We're starting slow, nothing too overwhelming." But the first sensation, simple yet profound, caught Philia off guard. When Daniel reached for her hand, his fingers lightly grazing her palm, she jerked her hand away suddenly. A sound escaped her lips, a sound that Daniel hadn't expected. It was something between a squeak and a gasp, and it came from her before she could suppress it. Her face, usually composed and calm, showed a flash of surprise and confusion. "What was that?" she asked, her voice still slightly breathless. "What is this sensation?" Daniel smiled, realization dawning on him. "I think you just experienced ticklishness, Doctor." Ticklishness. Philia repeated the word, testing it on her tongue as if trying to understand it fully. "This sensation, it is uncomfortable, yet it is not painful. It is difficult to describe. It's a complex sensation," Daniel explained. "It's a mix of pleasure and discomfort, something that makes you laugh uncontrollably, even though you're not in pain. It's believed to be a bonding mechanism among humans." Philia tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "A bonding mechanism." "Exactly," Daniel said, leaning back slightly. "Humans have a deep social need to connect with others, and tickling often triggers laughter in ways that create bonds between people. It's involuntary, but it's also something deeply human." Philia was silent for a moment, processing this information. "May I experience it again?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I wish to understand it better." Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second before he nodded. "Of course." This time, as his fingers traced lightly across her palm again, Philia's reaction was immediate. The laughter bubbled out of her, uncontrolled and bright, a sound that was as foreign to her as it was endearing. For a moment, she could do nothing but laugh, her usually reserved demeanor shattered by this simple human sensation. She gasped for breath between fits of laughter, the intensity of it taking her by surprise. "I cannot control it," Philia gasped, her voice shaking with laughter. "It is so unusual." Daniel could hardly contain his own laughter, the sight of the normally composed Lumari scientist reacting so strongly to something as simple as tickling was both heartwarming and funny. It was a moment of genuine connection, one that transcended the biological differences between them. It was a reminder that no matter how advanced the Lumari were, there were some things that even they could not predict. And that was exactly what made this experiment so exciting. As the laughter subsided, Philia sat back, her cheeks flushed a deeper shade of purple. "This sensation is unlike anything I have ever experienced. It is strange, yet enjoyable." "Exactly," Daniel said, smiling at her reaction. "It's a paradox of pleasure and discomfort. It's part of what makes humans, well, human. Thalia looked up at him, her glowing violet eyes meeting his, a small smile lingering on her lips. Thank you, Commander. This experiment, though unusual, has opened a door I did not expect. Daniel's smile softened. It's only just beginning, Doctor. With the neural connector still working its magic, they were about to explore even more of what it meant to experience the world as humans did, and Thalia was about to learn that the world of sensory experiences was far more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined. Exploring the depths of sensory understanding. The lab hummed quietly as the neural connector continued its work, sending soft pulses of energy into Dr. Thalia Neva's nervous system. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harrington watched the readings closely, his fingers hovering near the monitor. The experiment was progressing smoothly. Too smoothly, he thought. It was one thing to understand the theory of a neural cross-species connection, but it was entirely another to witness it unfold in real time. And in Thalia's case, witnessing the reserved Lumari scientist experience the depth of human sensory responses was far more than a scientific curiosity. It was an awakening. Thalia's laughter had been a revelation, but as the moments passed and she regained her composure, it was clear that the emotional and physical reactions were far more complex than either of them had anticipated. Daniel glanced at her, noting how her lavender skin seemed to shimmer faintly under the lab lights, her normally composed features still flushed with a deeper shade of purple. I must admit, Thalia said, her voice softer now, I had not expected such an intense reaction. It is both overwhelming and intriguing. Daniel smiled, his gaze shifting from the monitors to her. It's a lot for the brain to process, especially when your nervous system has never experienced anything like it before. I can imagine it feels like an entire new realm of sensations opening up. Thalia nodded, her silvery hair catching the light as she shifted slightly in her seat. Yes, it feels like I'm perceiving the world in a way that is more immediate, more visceral than I ever thought possible. This wasn't just an experiment anymore, Daniel realized. It was a deeply personal journey for Thalia. He had assumed that the Lumari, with their precise, calculated understanding of the world, would be able to compartmentalize these sensations, experience them, perhaps even analyze them, but not be emotionally affected by them. But in the short time that the experiment had been underway, he had seen something he didn't expect. Thalia wasn't just understanding human experiences, she was living them. What's next? Thalia asked, turning her head slightly to look at Daniel. There was a new spark in her violet eyes. One of curiosity, yes, but also something deeper, a hunger for understanding, for more. Daniel adjusted the settings on the neural connector, preparing for the next phase of the experiment. We're going to explore some other human sensations now. Things like taste, texture, and sound. I think we can start with something simple, a sweet taste. As he spoke, he reached over to a small tray on the table, picking up a piece of ripe fruit, a bright red apple. The fruit, though simple in nature, was an experience in itself. Humans had a deep connection to food, something that combined physical pleasure with emotional satisfaction. For the Lumari, food was just sustenance, functional and necessary, but rarely something to be savored. This would be another step in helping Thalia understand the richness of human experience. Try this, Daniel said, holding the apple up toward Thalia. It's sweet, refreshing, and part of what makes life more enjoyable. Thalia hesitated for a moment, then took the apple from his hand. She studied it with a quiet intensity, as though searching for hidden meaning in its red skin and smooth surface. Daniel couldn't help but smile at how methodical she was being, every action deliberate and calculated. With a deep breath, Thalia brought the apple to her lips. She bit into it slowly, her sharp violet eyes narrowing slightly as the taste hit her tongue. She paused, chewing thoughtfully as her brain adjusted to the new sensory input. I did not expect it to be this, Thalia said, her voice tinged with surprise. It's sweet, but also there is a richness to it, A fullness that is not just physical. It's emotional. Exactly, Daniel said, his tone gentle. For humans, food isn't just about nutrition. It's tied to our memories, our emotions, and our social experiences. The sweetness of the fruit, for example, can bring comfort or happiness depending on the context. Sometimes, the taste of something familiar can remind us of home or a moment from our past. Thalia seemed to be processing this concept deeply, her violet eyes focusing on the fruit, but her mind clearly drifting elsewhere. After a moment, she took another bite. This time, her reaction was more visceral. Her shoulders relaxed, her lips curving into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "This is pleasant," Thalia said softly. "I can understand now why humans have such an attachment to food." Daniel nodded, watching her carefully. "You're not just understanding the sensations themselves, but the emotional weight they carry. That's what makes them so powerful." After a few moments, Thalia put the apple down on the table, her fingers lingering on the smooth surface. Her expression shifted again, this time to one of contemplation. "I now feel a strange longing," she admitted, "a sense of wanting more, not just of the fruit, but of the experience itself. This is new." "You're experiencing desire," Daniel explained. "It's another facet of being human. The drive to seek out pleasurable experiences, to repeat things that bring us joy. It's instinctual." Thalia's gaze turned toward Daniel, and for the first time since the experiment began, he saw a hint of something more in her eyes. "This desire," she murmured, almost to herself. "I am not sure how to control it." Daniel took a breath, choosing his next words carefully. "That's part of being human, Thalia. We're not always in control of our emotions or desires. That's why we have relationships, friendships, love, connections with others. They help us navigate these feelings." Thalia tilted her head, her silvery hair catching the light as she looked at him, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "Connections," she repeated, as though testing the word. "Like the one we share during this experiment." Daniel paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure if she meant it in the way that humans usually did, but there was something undeniably personal about this exchange. The deeper they went into the experiment, the more Thalia seemed to open up, and the more Daniel found himself drawn to her curiosity, her intellect, and her genuine willingness to understand what it meant to be human. Before he could respond, Thalia picked up another piece of fruit, a small orange this time. She turned it over in her hands, her fingers gently pressing against the skin. "You mentioned sound earlier," she said, her voice thoughtful. "What is it about sound that makes it so emotional?" Daniel's mind shifted gears as he considered her question. Sound is deeply connected to emotion. Music, for example, is one of the most universal human experiences. A song can make us feel joy, sadness, nostalgia, or excitement, sometimes all at once. With that, Daniel walked over to the control panel and selected a piece of music, a soft, melodic tune that was known for evoking a sense of calm and peace. As the first notes filled the room, Thalia's eyes closed for a moment, her posture softening as the music washed over her. She tilted her head slightly, as though listening for something more. "It makes me feel peaceful," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "like I'm floating. I feel the music, but I also feel something else, a connection to something beyond myself." "That's the power of sound," Daniel said quietly. "It's a bridge between us and the world around us. Sometimes it brings people together. Other times, it helps us reflect inwardly. It's one of the ways humans experience the world emotionally." As the music continued, Thalia sat in silence, her eyes distant, yet filled with wonder. For the first time, Daniel saw her as something more than just a scientist or an alien being. He saw someone who was learning, evolving, and perhaps even beginning to feel the same kind of emotions that humans experienced every day. And that realization, though subtle, sent a shiver down his spine. This experiment was no longer just about sharing sensations. It was about bridging two vastly different worlds, one of logic and reason, and the other of emotion and experience. The journey had only just begun, and Daniel knew that there were many more discoveries to come. But for now, the music played on, and Thalia, the reserved Lumari scientist, was learning to feel uncharted territory in the mind. The rhythmic hum of the Celestial Harmony Research Station seemed distant as Thalia Neva sat in her examination chair, her mind still processing the strange, overwhelming sensations she had just experienced. The sweet fruit, the laughter from Tickling, and the soothing music, they were all so intensely human, yet completely alien to her. For the first time, she felt as though she were not just a passive observer of the world, but a participant in it. The emotional depth of these sensations was something she had never anticipated, and the more she experienced, the more she realized just how much she had missed by never feeling them before. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Harrington observed her carefully, standing a few steps away, but close enough to offer assistance if needed. Thalia could sense the subtle shift in their dynamic. She had seen him as a guide, a scientist leading her through the unknown. But now, there was an unspoken bond between them, a connection forged through their shared experiences. He had not only helped her explore the depths of human sensation, but had also become part of her understanding of what it meant to feel. She had noticed how his presence affected her, how her pulse quickened when he was close, how she became hyper-aware of his movements, the way his voice resonated with an emotional undertone that she had never understood before. These were the kinds of experiences humans took for granted, but to her, they were new and unsettling. "Are you all right, Doctor?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but with a note of concern. His eyes softened, watching her carefully as she sat, hands clasped on her lap, her eyes closed in deep thought. Thalia blinked, suddenly aware of her heightened awareness. She felt the strange flutter in her chest again. "Yes," she replied, her voice even, though tinged with curiosity. "I believe I am processing everything. It is just unexpected." Daniel nodded, sensing that she needed time to fully comprehend what she was going through. "Take your time. These are sensations that you're not used to. They can be overwhelming, especially all at once, but you're doing well." His words were kind, and Thalia found herself appreciating them in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had always been the one in control of her emotions, the one who analyzed and calculated. But now, she was experiencing something far more complex, a series of unbidden feelings that tugged at her, that made her question the very foundation of her species' understanding of the world. Her thoughts returned to the sensation of tickling, a simple touch that had made her laugh uncontrollably. The thought of it made her cheeks flush deeper, a phenomenon she had never experienced before. "When I laughed," Thalia began, her voice quiet, "I felt something that was simultaneously physical and emotional. It was as though I could not control either aspect of it. I found myself wondering if the connection between the body and emotion is truly as inseparable as you claim." Daniel's face softened, and he took a step forward. "It's what makes us human. The body and emotions are deeply intertwined. Laughter, for example, is not just a physical response. It's also a social one. It's how we bond with others, how we share moments of joy and connection." Thalia turned her head slightly to look at him, her violet eyes piercing and full of new understanding. "Social bonding," she repeated the term. "That is why Tickling feels so vulnerable." Daniel gave a small nod. "Exactly. Vulnerability is an essential part of human relationships. When we laugh together, we expose ourselves in ways that create trust and intimacy. It's not about the sensation itself. It's about what it represents. You allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone, and in return, you share something meaningful." Thalia processed his words, and for the first time, she could feel a weight shift within her, a subtle, profound change. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she had been missing in her own understanding of connection and sensation. Her gaze shifted toward the table where a holographic display showed her recent brain scans. The images were filled with flickering light as her neural pathways adjusted, synchronizing with the human sensory input. As Daniel had explained, the neural connector had opened pathways between her brain and the human experience, allowing her to process emotions and sensations in ways her species had never been able to do. Her own brain activity had changed. There were new patterns of light in her scans, patterns that mimicked the human baseline. Her sensory cortex had started to respond like a human's, processing emotions and tactile sensations more intensely than the cold, logical way she had experienced the world before. "What happens now?" Philia asked, her voice steady, though the uncertainty lingered beneath her calm exterior. "What more should I expect?" Daniel's expression was serious but filled with a quiet excitement. "Now we go deeper. There are more sensations to explore, more experiences that can help you understand how humans see the world, through their senses, yes, but also through their emotions. It's not just about feeling these things, it's about understanding their context. We can explore more human experiences together." Philia met his gaze, and something new flickered in her eyes. Curiosity and something else, something more personal. "And what exactly do you mean by context?" she asked, intrigued by the challenge. Daniel's smile was small but knowing. Context is everything. It's the emotional backdrop for every experience. The way we interpret a touch, a word, a gesture. It's never just about the physical act. It's about what it means, the emotional state you're in, the relationship you have with the person, the environment you're in. All these things influence how you experience the world. She nodded slowly, still absorbing everything. "So, this experiment will not just change my understanding of human sensations, it will change my understanding of human emotions too." "Exactly," Daniel said, moving a bit closer. "It's not just about what you feel physically. It's about how those feelings make you who you are in the moment, how the human mind and body work together to form something deeper than logic alone." Philia stood up from the chair, her body suddenly feeling lighter, like a shift had occurred inside her. She turned to face Daniel, her voice steady, but with a trace of something new, a warmth, a subtle crack in the distance that had always existed between them. "I want to understand," she said, her tone quiet, yet filled with resolve. "I want to understand the connections humans feel. I want to understand what makes you laugh, what makes you weep, what makes you love." Daniel felt his heart race at her words, the warmth in her voice, the intensity of her gaze. There was something undeniably compelling about her openness. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a journey they were taking together, exploring the very essence of what it meant to be human. "Then let's continue," Daniel said, his voice low but full of emotion. "There's much more to discover." Philia looked at him for a moment longer before nodding, as if making a decision. "Yes, let us continue, Commander. But this time, I believe it is not just the experiment that is important. It is the journey we take together to understand each other." And in that moment, the air between them seemed to shift again, this time with a subtle but unmistakable connection that went beyond the data, beyond the scientific curiosity. It was something human, something emotional. A connection born not just from shared knowledge, but from shared experience. As the experiment continued, they ventured into uncharted territory, not just in terms of science, but in the emotional landscapes they were both beginning to navigate together. And neither of them could have predicted how deep that journey would go. For the first time, Philia understood what it meant to feel. And Daniel knew that this was a turning point, one that would change everything they knew about themselves and each other.